We did not do a sign up for this, so we ran out of soup, and we're very, very sorry, but we pulled some more out, so there's more tomato soup. So if you did not get something to eat, please go see Gwen. There is soup now, so they got some more soup out, and there's definitely bread and things that you all can eat. So today, as I'm just going to make sure, Bo's going to give me the thumbs up when he gets up in the booth to make sure that we're recording it. As you can see, he's got the camera for people who couldn't be here. So we're good. You all saw him before I did. Y'all are great. So, yes. Up. Okay, is that better? Okay, very good. So I'm going to talk today about the state of the United Methodist Church. It's been a while since we've had an update. Also wanted to kind of give you an update of our annual conference and then of our church, Epworth, which we love so much. So first off, you all know that the 2020 General Conference was postponed initially to 2021, then 2022, and then they decided to postpone it to 2024 because of COVID reasons. That has created a kind of vacuum for people, and it's created a lot of uncertainty because people don't know what's going to happen. What was supposed to happen at the 2020 General Conference was there was legislation before the delegates. So it operates a lot like Congress, where there's legislation, you read it, you can amend it, it goes to committee, and then it comes before the floor, and then you can amend it from the floor, and then you can vote on it. There was a piece of legislation called the Protocol for Separation and Grace. So protocol was meant to allow a grace-filled path for the United Methodist Church to split into two basic bodies. One that takes a more conservative interpretation of Scripture, particularly around human sexuality. So they are the ones who want to keep the prohibition against same-sex marriages and against the ordination of LGBTQ people in our church. And then there would be the continuing United Methodist Church, which would be kind of a big tent that would allow people to hold their beliefs of conscience, but would remove the prohibitions against marrying LGBTQ people in our sanctuaries and by our pastors, would remove the prohibition from against ordination. Now, the reason I'm saying it's a big tent is because no one would be forced to marry a gay couple if they felt it went against their conscience. No church would be forced to have a gay pastor. Now, to me, that's a relief, not for the church, but for the pastor. I would hate to go to a church where my, being is not affirmed. But the reason why that's a good thing to have a big tent is that it allows people to change their minds and their hearts. We all know from the work of Camp Rehoboth around here locally that hearts can change, that people's minds can change. And so having a big tent allows people to come in and to then experience the fruit of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit through everybody, and it allows them to change their minds and their hearts. And so, that's why it's okay. I sometimes get questioned, why do you think it's okay to have this big tent? And for me, that's why I think it's okay, because it gives people the space to change their hearts, instead of saying you have to agree this way or you're out. So when 2020 didn't happen, many supporters of the protocol began to withdraw their support. And additionally, the Global Methodist Church, which is the church that will embody the conservative branch of the church, went ahead and launched on May 1st of this year, which then created all sorts of chaos of churches wanting to figure out, do we have to decide now whether to go or not to go? Does every church have to take a vote? What is going on? And so many churches are using what is called the Taylor Disaffiliation Plan, which was put into place at the specially called General Conference in 2019. You all remember that conference. You grieved over it. You lamented over it, where we went with a sense of hope and came away with a sense of despair, because not only did they not lift the prohibitions against LGBTQ marriage and ordination, but they made the punishments stricter. If you recall from that particular year, now if pastors conduct a same-sex wedding and are brought to trial and are found guilty, then there is a mandatory 1-year suspension without pay. And that was never in the Book of Discipline. So they not only didn't lift the prohibitions, they tightened them. And so many churches then were wanting to disaffiliate. And the question was, why now? Why disaffiliate now? Well, I think, again, because the General Conference was postponed and the polarization in our society has continued to grow, people feel like we just want to be in our own camps. And so there have been many churches that have used this tailored disaffiliation plan. What that does is it allows the trust clause to be opened up for a short period of time. So, the trust clause. The United Methodist Church owns all of the property of all churches, schools, hospitals that have the United Methodist name. We, as a local congregation, hold this building in trust for the United Methodist Church, which means that the building doesn't technically belong to us. We are, in some ways, stewards of the property, like we talked about this morning in worship. But we don't own it. We have the right to use it. We have, but even if we're going to make substantial changes, we have to get permission from the District Board of Church Location and Building. So churches then can't just decide to leave, because they would have to either leave their property or they could buy their property from the United Methodist Church. And most people can't afford to purchase their church building and land. So the tailored disaffiliation plan allowed churches to leave the denomination with their property upon fulfilling 2 requirements. One was that they had to pay 2 years' worth of apportionments, and the second was that they had to pay their unfunded pension liabilities, because the way we fund our pastors, retired pastors' pensions is by churches that are paying into the system. And so they would have to pay their unfunded portion of that. It also said that annual conferences could add anything to that they wanted to. So there could be negotiations. So for instance, if an annual conference had lent a church money and the church hadn't paid it back, the conference could require that gets paid back. So the tailored disaffiliation plan is a short-term opening of the trust clause, and it ends on December 31st of 2023. So a lot of churches felt like they weren't sure what General Conference 2024 was going to bring, and so they wanted to get out while they could, basically. Now, here's the thing. Many of them, the reason behind the Taylor plan was originally the conservatives thought that the progressives would leave and that they would keep the denomination. But then when they realized that there were actually more progressive people in the United Methodist Church, they realized that, no, it was them who was going to have to do the leaving. And so several of these conservative churches weren't sure what was going to happen in 2024, and so decided to get out now. Let me see, I'm trying to think of what order I want to put this in. So we are part of the Northeast jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church. So there are regions, and that is our region, the Northeast jurisdiction. It's basically the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. And so in our jurisdiction, over 1,000 churches have disaffiliated, which is 15.8% of our churches. And that's just to date. So that doesn't, who knows how many more are going to disaffiliate. In our own annual conference, we had decided that initially all we were going to require, the Conference Board of Trustees had decided that all they were going to require was the basic 2 years' worth of apportionments and the unfunded pension liability. And then our bishop retired last year, they split up our area. So our Peninsula Delaware Conference was part of the Philadelphia area with the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. So they split the two conferences and sent our conference with the Baltimore Washington Conference and the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference with the Greater New Jersey Conference just to provide coverage. When we were linked with the Baltimore Washington Conference, their policy was to require 2 years of apportionments, the unfunded pension liability, plus 50% of the property value. So our trustees voted in May of this year to adopt that. And so many of to be effective July 1. It did not get communicated very well to the conference, and so there was a bit of an uproar. And so now they're trying to allow some churches who had started the process of disaffiliation to fall under the old plan, where they only have to pay 2 years of apportionments and the pension liability. My personal belief, so this is now moving from fact into opinion, okay? So my personal belief is that the first amount that we asked for wasn't enough. Only asking for 2 years of apportionments and the pension liability isn't enough. However, I feel like 50% of the property of the church is too much. So, I kind of feel like we should be in between. And the reason why is that I feel like if churches want to leave, we need to allow them to leave. That if they are going to stand against further inclusion, then let them go. Ironically, what we found, and so now it's back to fact, what we found is that many churches will cite Black Lives Matter as their reason for leaving, or they will cite that they just want to become an independent church. And so some of this has not been about human sexuality. In our own annual conferences, we've had 22 churches so far disaffiliate. That means that 22 churches have completed the process. We believe we have somewhere between 50 and 100 more that are in the process, which would take us from 350 churches down to maybe 200 churches. In anticipation of this, our annual conference, the Peninsula Delaware Conference, reduced the number of districts from 4 districts to 3. We used to be part of the Dover district. In fact, I was your district superintendent for a while. Now we're part of the Delaware district, which includes the whole state of Delaware. And so that was part of how we were responding to this anticipation of losing further churches. Let me check my notes and make sure that we've covered everything so far. One thing that just you all should know is that the Northeast jurisdiction as a whole has been losing members over the years. But since the pandemic, most of our churches and our average attendance as a whole in the Northeast jurisdiction is 40 to 60% of pre-pandemic numbers. And some of that is because people are tired of fighting. Some of that is the pandemic. There's just been a lot of reasons. But it's important to remember that 40 to 60% of pre-pandemic attendance, which also then reduces the number of dollars for, apportionments and things like that. And further, the College of Bishops in the Northeast jurisdiction had covenanted, so it's not in stone, but they had covenanted together to hold in abeyance any trials for pastors who conduct same-sex weddings until after the 2024 General Conference, because they wanted to kind of make sure, that was part of the protocol actually, was that we would put trials on hold until after this was settled. And so that's where we are as an annual conference. Let me see if there are other things. One of the questions I was asked was, what about our Camp Acomath? Camp Acomath actually in the early 2000s became a separately incorporated 501c3. in part because then they could receive grants from other organizations. So we will still have access to our camp, and although they may lose some funding from apportionments, they will not close. There are other camps in other conferences that are based completely on conference income, and they will probably lose some of their camps as a result of this. So as you can see, things are going to change. I don't know that what it's going to look like. We don't know yet. A lot of it is just still up in the air until we get to 2024. But we do know that a lot of churches have chosen to disaffiliate ahead of time. And like I said, I'm trying to remember what the statistic was. I think less than 50% have joined the Global Methodist Church when they have disaffiliated. So again, that shows you that some of them are just leaving because they want to be independent churches. And others are, leaving for different reasons. But the Global Methodist Church is launching and continuing to move on towards being a conservative denomination. So where does that leave Epworth? We decided as a church that we were going to stay and fight for full inclusivity. That's what we had decided before I got here, is that we are a Methodist church and we are going to stay and fight for inclusivity. We are committed to that at least through 2024. And I think in 2024, depending on the outcome of that general conference, then we will either remain in the denomination or we will have further conversation, because a lot of it depends on whether those prohibitions are lifted. We see ourselves as staying engaged in the struggle to bring about full inclusivity for the United Methodist Church. And so that's why we are committed to staying within the United Methodist Church. However, that being said, the time comes when we have to make a statement about who we are, and does all truly mean all? And we believe that now is the time to say that we are working towards and moving towards full inclusion. And therefore, I asked the Board of Trustees, and they approved, and then it got approved by the governing board, that we would open our church to all weddings, regardless of human sexuality. So, it is a risk because we are going against the current book of discipline. But we feel like this is one of those acts of civil disobedience, if you want to say, where we are saying this is the direction we are heading in, that we can't continue to say that all means all, that we invite all, that all are welcome here, if all are not free to have their marriage blessed in this place. And Bo and I have decided that we would be willing to officiate at such weddings. Again, we recognize that there is risk. We hope that the College of Bishops will keep to their covenant and will not take anyone to trial. But we recognize that this is not necessarily going to be a popular decision, especially among those who are conservative. However, we feel like it's so important right now for several reasons. First is we want to assure you all that this is the direction that we're moving in, that is so important to us as a congregation and as your pastors, that moving towards full inclusion is at the core of who we believe we are and who we believe God has called us to be. And so we are not doing this to seek attention, to make trouble, but we are doing it to assure ourselves and really assure the wider community who is looking to Epworth and saying, you say all means all, and yet you can't hold weddings. And so, we're hoping that this will be a statement to our wider community that all truly means all. I did, because this is who I am, I did call my district superintendent and let him know that this was my intention, Bo's intention, and the church's intention, and he said, I fully support you. So we have his support, which is another reason why I agree with that big tent. 5 years ago, he was not in that camp. He would not have been able to fully support this. And so he has changed and has said that, he does need to share it with the bishop, which I completely understand, but that he will fully support us in this endeavor. So let me see if there are any other things that I wanted to cover on that part. We do believe that this is honoring God, that this decision is honoring God, that this is the next faithful step to take. And so, this has not been one that we just decided willy-nilly. This has come through prayer. We have worked as a couple for full inclusion in this annual conference since we were ordained in 1993. And so, this for us is just the next faithful step to take. And so it came after much discernment and much prayer, and we believe that this is what will honor God. But we also hope that this will set an example for other congregations who may be afraid to do this, who may be afraid to take this stance. That, sometimes it takes one domino to start the whole thing off. And so we feel like because of, we're pretty well known in the community, because of all of our ministries, because of all the things we do, that this may encourage other churches to also take this step, which would, again, show the world that the church can change, that we can be fully inclusive, and that is indeed our intention. So I have another announcement that I want to make, but I wanted to just pause here and allow any questions or thoughts on this. So David Garrett. So David's question was, are there any other churches in our annual conference who are taking this position? And the answer is no. In fact, when I searched for churches that were doing this, the closest one I found was in Indiana. So this is not, yeah. Indiana, but yeah. And so no, there are not churches. There are churches in Baltimore, Washington that have refused to do any weddings until they could do all weddings. But there is no church in our conference, or I believe in Baltimore, Washington, that has taken this step yet. So this will be a first. So we will see how that goes. Other questions or thoughts? Yes, Chet. I suppose that could always happen, yes. I suppose that could always happen. But my understanding of it was that that basically they were putting a hold on all trials and that they wouldn't then investigate them or retry them after 2024. So, and again, our hope is that in 2024, we will lift the prohibitory language. Right now, the Book of Discipline has 3 things. Weddings, same-sex weddings cannot take place in our churches, and pastors cannot officiate at same-sex weddings, no matter where they are, and we cannot ordain gay or lesbian people. Now, you all know that that part has already been broken. Baltimore, Washington ordained this time an openly gay person. There have been transgender people who have been ordained. So for some reason, that one has been a little bit easier for conferences than for churches. But so that's the hope. Other questions? Yes, Kathy. Mm-hmm. Like a vow renewal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Susan's like, uh-oh. That's right. She's got the ring. She's wearing the ring. Right. So yes, so the question is that there have been many of you who are married legally, but who have not been able to have your ceremonies in the church. And yes, we would be happy to do either a vow renewal ceremony or, a church wedding of blessing for you all who have had those weddings outside of the church. That's right. Are there other questions? What was that? Oh, I'd only get one strike against me. Yeah, that's right, the member discount. Yes?
Knowing the position that Epworth will be taking, how do you anticipate that being received by other faith, whether they're UMC or faith partners?
Yeah, I think there will be some that will absolutely celebrate with us. Some of the Episcopalian churches will celebrate with us. The UUs will celebrate with us. MCC, I hope, will celebrate with us. But I think there will be some for whom this will be another step. People who don't want to work with us now, this will just be, another step for them another reason for them to not want to work with us. So I don't know that it's going to create any new rifts as much as it is going to solidify churches that already don't want to work with us because we're the quote-unquote gay church. So thanks, Kristen. Other questions? Yes, Chet. Yeah. So Chet's question is about the United States church separating from the church, the global church, but particularly the church in Africa. The conferences in the continent of Africa, but also the Philippines and Eastern Europe, are very much more conservative. However, the way that our Book of Discipline was structured, we outgrew its structure without thinking it through. And so what we did when we started becoming a global church was we allowed the conferences outside of the United States to adapt the Book of Discipline to their context. However, they still got to vote on our Book of Discipline. And so it really was kind of an unfair setting because then they influenced our context. Most of the churches in the conferences outside do not want to split because they do not want to lose the funding. Honestly. I mean, it really does come down to money. So they are willing to allow the United States to become its own region and vote on its own Book of Discipline so that their Book of Discipline can still say that homosexuality goes against, traditional Christian teaching, but we can change ours and it won't impact them. And so, at least from the delegates that have been in conversation with, many of the churches outside of the United States do not want the church to completely split. They realize that they would not get the kind of funding that they're currently getting. We fund many of their bishops. We help fund some of their pension programs. There's a lot of funding from the United States that they would not want to lose. So yes, I mean, you've kind of heard correctly, but they want, I think many of them want to stay affiliated with us because of that. Yes, Kristen. A region.
Well, because there's the jurisdictional conference and the sessional conference.
Yes, yes.
Is that what needs to change?
So the proposal is twofold. One is to adopt a global Book of Discipline that will be mandatory for everyone across the world to follow. So it will be tiny. And then the second piece of legislation is that each region would be able to adopt its own rules as part of a Book of Discipline. And so the United States would become a region. We would still have our 5 jurisdictions, but we would become a region that would vote on our own Book of Discipline, our own rules. I mean, for example, things like we have rules in our Book of Discipline about parsonages. Churches in Africa don't have parsonages. It's ridiculous to have standards in our Book of Discipline that they can't even abide by. So, I mean, that's just one, non sexual example. That's just, and so that's the idea, is that we would become a region and have our own section of the Book of Discipline. So every Book of Discipline would have the first part, which is global, and then its regional adaptation. Yes, Lynn. We are hoping that that will be in 2024. And, that's one of the reasons actually why some of the more progressive pastors have petitioned the conference or have communicated to the conference board of trustees that we feel like the 50% of the property value is onerous, because we want them to leave if they want to leave, which then allows us to have more votes at our general conference to pass the legislation that we want to pass. What's that?
Go on.
Yeah. So, again, I think it's just, so it is our hope, and it is my goal to have that language removed in 2024. And it is the goal of many, many people in the United States. And so, again, the big thing is, the only thing I can see that would prevent it from happening in 2024 is if we have to approve a regional conference first, which would happen in 2024, and then we would have a regional conference, sometime in probably 2 years, 2026, that would then vote. But again, that's, and some of it is hard, because who can say what's going to happen in 2024? We had no idea the pandemic was going to happen. And so, we were all set to go in May of 2020, and then that got completely postponed. So, but those of us who are working, so I am the chair of our delegation in our annual conference. The chairs of delegations across the connection have been working to try to say, if we get anything passed at 2024, we want to lift these prohibitions. So that is, our first goal. So that's our hope. But again, no guarantees, sadly. And that's why I said if things don't change in 2024, we as a body might have a different conversation. Sterling. Yes. Yes. So Sterling's question is that he presumes that the delegates to General Conference would support the regional conference theory, and that the regional conference delegates would absolutely support dropping these prohibitions in the Book of Discipline. What we know for a fact is that the strict prohibitions that were passed at the specially called General Conference in 2019 passed by 4 votes, and that included almost 50% of delegates who were from overseas. And so I think that's one of the reasons why many of the conservatives have not wanted to split it out into a regional conference, is because they know that if it was just the United States, we would drop those prohibitions rapidly. So go ahead. Yes. So churches that would be opposed to having a regional conference are the ones that are disaffiliating, which is ironic, because the disaffiliation plan was meant for the progressives, for us, meant to kick us out, but we stayed. There was another hand, did I see? No? Okay. Sure, Kristen. Yeah. We do not know yet. We're waiting on Judicial Council. So once they decide, the rumor, but it's only rumor, is that they are going to consider it the postponed 2020 General Conference, because so much work has already been put into understanding the legislation instead of having to elect new delegates. But Judicial Council has not ruled that yet, so we are still waiting. They need to rule that by next summer because we would need to elect new delegates at this next annual conference if we were going to have new delegates. So, yes. Right. So the question was, does the Judicial Council, which is kind of like our Supreme Court, so it's no surprise that our structure was created around the same time as the structure of the United States. So the Council is a lot like our Supreme Court. They have traditionally been very conservative. I think part of that is still true today because we remain committed to diversity. And so as we're bringing in people from other areas, then we tend to bring in more conservative voices. However, they tend to be strict readers of the Book of Discipline. And so as long as we can get the Book of Discipline changed, we should be fine. It's just, if it's not changed, then they won't change it. Other questions? So I know this is a lot to take in, and I am happy to have further conversation about this with any of you all. I also have some handouts that have the high points of this conversation, but I do have one more announcement, and then we are going to do a quick financial, I think, update. But this announcement is related to Epworth. We had so much fun at our 125th worship service, worshiping together, that we've decided that we're going to go back to one worship service at 10 o'clock. Oh, good. It creates a lot of energy when there are people in the room. It really does. B, we promise it will not be a 2-hour worship service. That was only because it was the 125th anniversary. Yeah. Applause. We feel like it'll also be easier on our tech team because right now they have to switch between services every single Sunday. And so, we're trying to get that to be as excellent as we can. And so it'll be a lot easier to make sure that we don't have any feedback, that all the monitors are working properly, that people can hear and see what they need to hear and see. So it'll be easier on our tech team. And the question has come up, well, for how long? So normally, I shouldn't say normally, since I've been here, we went to one service in January and then kind of stayed that way, when first year I was here, we added a second service in February, third service in March, and then we shut down because of the pandemic. Everyone's like, you have such power. So in some ways, we're going to just start this a little bit earlier. So we're going to start it the first Sunday of Advent, which is November 27th, is when we will start going to one service. And then people have asked for how long. Kind of common or traditional understanding of how long it takes experiments to work out and to see if they're really going to work is at least 6 months. And so it will at least be through the end of next summer, summer of 2023. Ooh, that's hard to say. So it'll at least be through next summer that we will be at one worship service. And then we'll see how it goes. We'll see how things roll out and, and go from there. So are there any questions about that? Yes. 10 o'clock. One worship service. It'll be at 10 o'clock and starting on November 27th. Okay. I'm going to call one of the Davids. I don't know which one of you is coming to do just a brief and I'm sorry, I have not been brief, so you don't have to be brief. Financial update, and then I'm going to put these sheets. They have all the details of stuff we've talked about. I'm going to put them on a table out in the foyer that you can pick up as you leave. Actually, I'll put them over here on this table that we used for soup. But it will also be online. It was recorded today, so if you want to go back and hear a piece of it that you didn't remember, you can go back. Here. Thank you, Gwen. Gwen is always so wonderful. But this will be posted online as well, so if you have any questions, hopefully, or if you didn't get all the details, these details will be answered. So please welcome David Hagelin.
Half of the David team has the privilege of leading the finance team. I realize I'm the only thing standing between what's happening here and an afternoon nap, so I really all the excitement is pretty much over. Very good news. Well, one of the gifts of the pandemic to Epworth and a lot of churches is that we learned how innovative and flexible we really could be. We continued our worship, albeit in a much different way, without missing much of a beat. Our ministries here at Epworth continued to be strong, even grew in some ways, certainly pivoted and changed, particularly our food ministry. But
Do you want me to give him mine too? Oh, the live stream. Duties as a sign.
and then I hold
Voila,
this
then
or
you can
put,
just- you
yeah, I
put
don't
it
have
in
a
your
pocket. I don't have a pocket. I'll just hold it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, that's the most fun I'll probably have all day. No. As I tried to say earlier, I did say, many didn't hear, is that one of the gifts of the pandemic is that we and other churches learned how innovative and flexible we could be. We carried through with worship without missing much of a beat, albeit in a much different way, basically online, strictly online for many months. And our ministries also continued without interruption, without missing a beat. We expanded our food ministry and changed it in some ways. So we learned that we could continue to be Epworth through worship and mission and ministry, despite this huge challenge none of us could see coming. As Pastor Vicki said, though, another gift of the pandemic is that fewer people began returning to church once we were able to. That's evident in the numbers that we see. And also, there's less money to work with. Budgets are smaller. In many cases, giving is down. And these are challenges that we face. And we certainly, on finance and in church leadership, appreciate all the gifts that you all have provided us with and continue to during the pandemic and since. I'm going to share a few statistics with you that indicate some of the challenges we face, even while being grateful for and being able to move forward with the gifts that we have because of all that you do. Looking at this current fiscal year, and Epworth operates on a July through June fiscal year, so we just ended our first quarter of the year. So for the first quarter of this year, our giving to the general fund, which funds our basic operations, and toward our mortgage is about 8% from a year ago. It's down quite a bit more than that compared to our budget, but compared to last year, it's about 8%. Income overall is down roughly 13% from a year ago. Now, income includes giving to general fund and mortgage, as well as special giving. And the other main component of our income is our rent. Funds that our revenue that we earn through groups that use our church, events that are held, that are held here. So rent is a pretty big component of our income as well. But giving is the main ingredient. So as I said, we're about 8% down in general mortgage fund giving for this year so far. Our expenses are up a bit, about 7% higher this year than last year. And we try to anticipate when we're going to have major expenses, but in the last year and a half, we've been confronted with some that we knew would be coming, but we didn't foresee how soon. Namely, I'm talking about the new roof that we had put on. So that's a large expense. That's on top of the continuing mortgage payment that we have and the lease payment for our heating and cooling system. We're about a third of the way, I guess, through the lease on our HVAC system that had to be completely replaced. Now, the really good news on the mortgage is that our mortgage payment is, or our mortgage balance, I should say, is down to about $165,000, that is, down from over $1 million before we conducted our capital campaign. So that down from $2 million when this church opened in 2008, when this building opened. So from $2 million to 160-some thousand. It was 3.7 million leading before our move here, I guess. Yeah, so we're talking about an incredible amount of progress, but we're at the point now where there's dribs and drabs coming in to continue to chip away at the mortgage. So our mortgage payment is about $3,400 a month. Our mortgage payment, our roof payment, or expected roof payment, once we know the final monthly payment, plus our HVAC lease payment combined is almost $10,000. So that's a large chunk of change every month. And between church leadership and staff, we are diligent in doing all we can to control expenses, to contain expenses, and certainly the trustees and their contract negotiations, their competitive bidding process, they do all that is humanly possible to do what's best for the church and to help us financially. So we appreciate all that's being done to keep our expenses down. Just in terms of giving, and I'm going to wrap up here in a second, our pledge campaign this past year was down a bit from the year before, but the year before was down a lot from the prior year. So it's kind of a good news, bad news story from that perspective. We have about 10% fewer pledgers. Our total pledge for this fiscal year was about 14% less. So, and the reason for that, COVID, fewer people coming, fewer people supporting the church, and we're still kind of gathering data with the large number of online worshipers we have as far as how much support may be coming from the online community. We're kind of still trying to get our arms around that. So there has been a lot because of that. Folks have left the church for whatever reason. Many were good supporters of the church. We've taken on new members, many of whom are supporting the church, and that will continue. So we're in a challenging time in terms of giving, needing to be a little higher if possible. And it would be wonderful if expenses could be lower, but we're limited in what we can do, certainly in that regard. So I think that pretty much covers it, other than to thank you again for all that you do to support the church financially and in other ways, and we appreciate all that you can continue to do. Thanks so much. Once I get unconnected.
Yeah. If I can get you connected, I don't want to. There we go.
Is it good?
Yay,
Great,
that's it,
great.
that's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. So this concludes everything that we've been saying. But I do want to tell you, woo! Don't touch it. Didn't you tell me not to touch it? I do want to tell you all thank you very, very much. That none of this is possible without you. And you're an awesome community. And yes, we have challenges, and all churches are facing challenges right now. And we have hope in God who created us and who created this particular community. So let's work together in that hope to continue to bring about the justice that God longs for, the inclusivity that God longs for, and the funding that allows us to continue to be this awesome church. Thank you all very much. Oh, thank you. Whew. I wanted you to look at that sheet before I printed it, but I'm like, oh well.
You're welcome.